The Man Who Knew Too Much, 1934 version, movie review. So this is an Alfred Hitchcock movie, and I say 1934 version because, interestingly enough, this is the only Alfred Hitchcock movie to get a remake. It also got remade in 1956 with Jimmy Stewart, and the 1956 version is much more famous. When people kind of reference this movie, usually they're referencing the 1956 version. Alfred Hitchcock also originally, he's from England, so he started off his career working in the British film industry before moving to America. So the 1950s version with Jimmy Stewart was made in America, this was made back in England. So why did I bother seeing this? Well, I'm going to go on a bit of a digression here, but I mentioned in a review of The Maltese Falcon that it had the famous Austrian-Hungarian film star Peter Lorre, I believe L-O-R-R-E, who has always kind of vaguely fascinated me. You know, it's one of those things, sometimes stuff that vaguely fascinates you can sometimes, you go on this kick, really. Something will trigger it, and then you'll get really into it for a couple days, and I guess that's what happened with me and Peter Lorre. Yeah, so it's difficult to kind of fully do justice to him by describing him. It's much better to just look up his old clips on YouTube if you don't know who he is. He's a foreigner. He comes from Austria-Hungary. He's got a bit of a tragic past. He was kind of escaping Nazi persecution of the Jews. So I don't want to... I'm going to talk about how strange and weird he is, which is going to sound a little bit unsympathetic. And it probably is a little bit unsympathetic, but he does kind of come across on the screen as kind of a bit weird. He's got kind of this strange kind of face, and he speaks English with this kind of slow foreign accent. And yet, like in a movie like Casablanca, when he's kind of, he's a shifty character, he's like a sly character that you can't really trust, and again, he's got the perfect face for it, sorry to say. He comes up as a little bit creepy, but also like that scene in Casablanca where he's trying to escape from the Nazis and he knows they've got him. It comes up as really kind of sympathetic and like you feel for him. I don't know. One of these days I'm going to do a whole separate review of Casablanca, but that whole scene just really fascinated me. And back in his day, he was like a pop culture icon. Like a lot of the Looney Tunes characters parodied him. I think he even popped up, or an animated version of him popped up in some of those old 1940s cartoons when they would do parodies of well-known Hollywood actors. He's just had like a big influence on pop culture. Other movies he's been in The Maltese Falcon and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, the Disney movie. Although by that time, he was getting a little bit older and fatter. Kind of the films he's in the 1930s and 40s, he's got kind of a very kind of thin appearance, but he got fat a little bit later on in life. So that, you know, that classic Disney movie 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, he's in that as one of the sidekick characters. Anyways, I guess after having seen a couple movies of him and rewatched some movies like Casablanca and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, I was eager to see more, and according to Wikipedia, this movie, The Man Who Knew Too Much, the 1934 movie, was the first English-speaking movie he had starred in after kind of fleeing Europe as a European Jew from the Nazis and settling in England. And again, apparently, according to Wikipedia, at the time he made this movie, he did not speak any English. So he ended up just learning all of his lines phonetically for this movie without being able to speak fluent English at the time. If that's true, it's incredible. because you watch this movie and he manages completely to steal every scene he's in. He plays like the villain in this movie, and he plays like the villain, like one of those classic James Bond movies, James Bond villains, you know, where he's quite charming and pleasant and very polite, but also he's got this viciousness to him where you can be polite one minute, but you feel he could cut your heart out the next. So it's a fascinating performance to watch. Now, unfortunately, this film is showing its age a bit. It's a 1934 movie, and it really looks like an old movie, at least the version I watched. The footage is grainy, the sound is staticky, and the transition between shots, like the cuts between shots, is just very abrupt. Now, I don't completely know what's going on here. I guess Hitchcock had always said, like, his early movies in England were not his best movies. He kind of gained full control of the craft later on in life. So maybe that's part of it. Also, I think British film industry had much less of a budget. So maybe that's another part of it. But another thing maybe, and somebody who knows more about this can give me some insight. This film is in the public domain now. I don't know why the Hitchcock movies from England are in the public domain and the ones in America are not, something to do with international copyright law. But this film is in the public domain, which means nobody gets any money from restoring it and re-releasing it, I think. Which would maybe explain why it looks a bit rough. There's no money in it for restoration. And if that's the reason, then I guess this is an interesting debate about, you know, the value of public domain versus the value of kind of keeping these movies privately licensed by the studio. I usually am a big public domain guy. You know, I think it's outrageous that studios like Disney have kind of changed copyright laws so that these movies are not in the public domain when, like, they really should be. But I don't know, maybe this is a point in the other direction. Or maybe, I don't know. Let me know if I'm getting something wrong. Anyway, all that aside, you can still see Hitchcock's genius popping through a lot. There's a few scenes where, in spite of all the flaws with the grainy footage and stuff I just mentioned, the tension is just masterfully drawn out. And there's a big shoot-'em-up scene at the end, which is pretty intense, and I was surprised that this was intense as it was for something back in 1934. You know, I would have thought, like, the studio would be like, no, it's too violent. Because, like, movies back then usually aren't as violent, right? But this one surprised me. And according to Wikipedia, this shootout scene at the end was based on the Siege of Sydney Street, which, when was the Siege of Sydney Street? 1910s, 1920s. It was a real-life shootout between, in England, between the police and the anarchists. So, a little connection there to anarchist history. Yeah, so, all in all, I think the 1956 version with Jimmy Stewart is a lot more polished. But if you're a classic film buff, there's enough here to be of interest. Yeah, I'd recommend it.